Turn this to gold, and you shall have my hand in marriage. Fail, and you shall die. That night, when the imp returned, she had nothing left to give. No matter, said the imp, the fruit of thy womb I desire. I shall have your firstborn child. She hastily agreed, and the imp worked through all the night, turning the straw into gold. Of Rumpelstiltskin. I'm really excited to jump into this one. So this story, what it really captures the essence of, and what we'll kind of be focusing on for this presentation, is how debt actually works. So this is sort of the thesis behind this story, the deeper meaning. And we're going to kind of, at the end of this, mostly this is going to be kind of the physical manifestation of how money debt works. There's also another double meaning to the story when it comes to how spiritual debt works as well, which we'll be kind of diving into a little bit at the end. So we'll get into this, and we'll be taking breaks, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts as we go throughout. So once there was a poor miller who longed to impress the king. So he told a lie. He claimed that his daughter could spin straw into gold. The king, greedy for wealth, had the girl brought to his castle. He locked her in a room filled with straw and demanded she prove it by morning or die. The girl was terrified. She had no idea how to spin straw into anything, let alone gold. She wept, and then just before midnight, the door creaked open. A strange little man stepped inside. He offered to help, but only for a price. She said, "Have this gift. A ring have I, an heirloom of my family." He took her ring and spun all of the straw into gold. When the king arrived in the morning, he was overjoyed, but the seed of greed had been planted in his heart, and he wanted more. He took her to a bigger room filled with even more straw and told her to spin it to gold, or he would kill her. The first kind of thing that we see is we have the miller who is willing to basically give his daughter over to the king. And in some versions of the story, it's actually because he is in debt to the king as well. So he's in debt, and he decides to spin a tale that's a total lie, that his daughter can do this thing. And so a big parallel that we kind of see is, does parental boasting put their kids into a situation where they have to inherit debt? Another one is, as soon as that happens, is that creditors are more than happy to take them into that debt. They're lying in wait, and when the child has come of age and is most vulnerable, they take their chance. So this is sort of one of those, and then the last thing they have to do is that you see that she sacrifices a family heirloom, sort of like family identity, to get out of it. So this is, I'm curious if you guys see any parallels here, but what we see kind of in our culture is usually what happens is once somebody has a child and they're growing up, a parent can sometimes have a tendency to start putting identity on the child in the form of what they can produce. And so they're like, oh, this child's going to be a doctor, this child's going to be this, this child's going to be that. And it forces them into a situation like college or other things where now they have to fulfill the expectations that the parent is putting on them. And as soon as that happens, they now they're now in a situation that's desperate enough to need to get debt. And so the creditors show up and they make this vulnerable child sign these documents. My dad talked about, when we were first talking about the story, how when he was started to sign his first student loan debt stuff, he was like, I didn't even know what I didn't even know what I was signing, but he did. And he did it so that he could achieve this identity that his parents wanted him to have. And so he signed it. And then what usually happens is it starts to have, we're going to see this get crazier in the later in the story, but she's having to begin sacrificing her family identity in order to achieve this. A personal example is, I remember when I was, I tried to do trade school for a while. So I immediately plunged into debt to try to get an HVAC license. And I, at the same time, was helping my dad remodel properties. And part of the deal was I would do it for him for a massive discount, but I would get equity in the properties. And I realized that if I sold all the equity I had in these assets that our family owned, I could basically pay off my debt. And it was extremely tempting. But because I had the ability to fall back on my family, I was actually able to retain both and pay it off. And so in a different situation, I would have had to immediately look at what I had been given as an asset in order to not necessarily advance in life very far, but to just get myself out of the hole that I was immediately plunged into to get started. And I think that's one of the things that's like, this is maybe a good idea to kind of give up an heirloom from your family if you're farther down the line and you have a family and you want to, and you guys, kind of run into a spot of bad luck. But to start with this, to begin your life, she just came of age and now she's already having to sell off what is most meaningful to her, all the meaning that she inherited from her family in order to survive. It's a pretty desperate situation. So, as the story continues, she wept, and the strange dwarf came again and demanded a price. So she's now in this second room where the king wants her to spin straw into gold again. It's even larger quantity. So she's weeping, and the strange dwarf came again and demanded a price. This necklace have I, an heirloom of my family, and save me. The straw was spun into gold again, and the king returned. And again, his greed surpassed that of the previous day, and he took her to the biggest room of his castle, filled with straw. Turn this to gold, and you shall have my hand in marriage. Fail, and you shall die. That night, when the imp returned, she had nothing left to give. No matter, said the imp, the fruit of thy womb I desire. I shall have your firstborn child. She hastily agreed, and the imp worked all through all the night, turning the straw into gold. The king was so pleased, he took the girl as his queen. A year passed, she gave birth to a beautiful child and forgot all about the bargain until one night the little man returned. He had come to collect. The queen was horrified. She offered him wealth, land, and anything he desired, but the little man shook his head. He said, something living is dearer to me than all the treasures of the world. And yet, perhaps moved by her sorrow, he made her one final offer. If she could guess his name within 3 days, she could keep the child. So at this point in the story, I chose this image because it's such like a creepy kind of dark moment where now the debt is coming in. And this is what happens when the debtors come to collect. And what we realize is that when you have nothing left to give, what debt always requires is your firstborn child. And this is true of every situation that we live in today when it comes to that point. Someone comes of age, whether it's from their parents kind of boasting about them or some other reason, they now plunge into debt in order to start their life. After they start their life, they get farther and farther into debt in order to potentially achieve more wealth, potentially to win the hand of the king, potentially whatever. And then by the time they actually achieve their desired goal, now the debt has come to collect and it is requiring their firstborn child. In this context, we see the plummeting birth rate in America and every developed country, mostly because of situations like this. A huge reason why people do this is financially. They're like, I don't have enough money for children. My dad has people talking to him all the time, and they'll be like, yeah, maybe like we want to have kids. We really want to have kids. And they're in like their 20s and they're married, but we have some debt. And so we need to pay that off. And then we'll be ready to have children. And he's like, how long do you guys think it'll take for the debt? Like 10 years. And so you cannot have the fruit of your womb, the firstborn is now gone. The firstborn has been sacrificed for the debt. The American people are currently, for example, in $1.252 trillion in credit card debt alone. And we're also in $1.86 trillion of student loan debt. And suddenly our birth rates are plummeting. And so what you're doing is when you give people debt as soon as they come of age, this future becomes extraordinarily blurry. And you begin to see it as, something that you could do to potentially sacrifice your firstborn. And one other question that's important to ask was this the upfront bargain when she started borrowing from Rumpelstiltskin? This was the fine print. They waited for this. And so it's like this is not something that you sign, like the college tuition certificate my dad was signing to get some funding. It didn't mention this, It didn't mention that this might be what you have to exchange. This is where people are reeled in slowly and then they're confronted. And this is why, like I said, I like this picture. It's like the demon comes to try to take your child. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm caught. Let's continue with the story and see how it resolves. So she tried every name she knew, but he said they were all wrong. So in this moment, she's like, is it Joe? Is it Luke? No. He says, those are all wrong. So she sent out messengers across the land to find more. She tried again when the imp returned, but to no avail. No matter what she guessed, the answer was always wrong until the third day. One of her messengers returned with a curious tale. Deep in the woods beyond the fox's den, he had seen a fire and a tiny figure dancing around it, singing, today I'll bake, tomorrow I'll brew, then I'll fetch the queen's new child too. It's good that no one knows my game, because Rumpelstiltskin is my name. That night, when the little man came again, the queen spoke the name. My child shall be my own, for I name you Rumpelstiltskin. He froze His eyes widened. He screamed, "Who told you? Who told you?" Stamping so hard that he sank into the earth, and in some versions, he tore himself in two. Happy ending. So, the question that is interesting to ask at this point, how do we find the name of Rumpelstiltskin? So this was sort of the magic thing that dismantled his entire scheme. So the first thing is you need help, right? You cannot, it's not something you can do alone. And the second thing is, this is something that's interesting. So in stories, wisdom is gathered around a fire. This is a typical kind of archetype that the fire represents, is that gathered around the flame is wisdom. And usually it's like a circle of counsel. And so usually what it represents also is there's like old men around a fire who are talking. And that is what, so we kind of saw last week with Jack and the Beanstalk, he gets advice from an old man. So the old man is an archetype of wisdom. The fire is also another, around a fire is also kind of an archetype of wisdom. So it happens around a place of wisdom and you need help. I feel like that's the solution. And so now knowing this, the beauty is that I think one thing to also kind of keep in mind is this is a multi-generational issue. And how do we know that? Well, the story actually starts with the miller being in debt first. And what does he give up? His firstborn child immediately. Like he was caught in the same trap. And thankfully, this girl is a better parent than him because she refused and she did everything. She also had more resources to discover this name. But this is a multi-generational issue, which is as soon as you make the choice to begin going down this path, you are passing down a legacy of debt, possibly, just like this family did. Now, she kind of, I think that maybe one parallel is like what she did by gathering a team and discovering a solution to this problem is kind of like what you would do with entrepreneurship. And so she was able to sort of counter the effects of debt through doing that sort of thing and essentially creating a new train of life. So as opposed to just like, because if she was to actually follow exactly what her father did, as soon as Rumpelstiltskin came the first time, she would have just given him her child. She'd be like, yep, this is what we do in our family. But she decided a new path. And I feel like that is the kind of thing that we can choose as well. Now, I want to end this time talking a little bit about the spiritual side of this as well. So this story is 4,000 years old, and it was called historically the name of the supernatural helper. And so this is it was not always Rumpelstiltskin. It wasn't always the daughter and the king. This dynamic kind of changed, but a while ago, researchers who saw what the Brothers Grimm did actually were able to use AI and other things to basically treat stories like an organism, and they were able to track their like almost going back in their family tree back to where it originated. And this story is about 4,000 years old, which means it actually happened at the beginning of the Bronze Age, at the end of the Stone Age, beginning of the Bronze Age. And the story that they were hearing for the most part is that this started kind of coming from real life events when people would show up in a village where everyone's just banging rocks together and those were their tools. And they were told that a supernatural being, like a god, came to them and showed them how to smelt metal. So nobody really knows how that started. No one really knows who was the first person to actually learn that if you melt a rock that looks like this, it turns into metal. And most lore, you've got Prometheus, giving fire to humans and other things like that through all sorts of different kinds of mythologies. It's always a god who gives that power to humans. Even in Tolkien's literature, the Silmarillion it was Melkor, the evil god of the entire story, that taught the elves how to make swords, because that's always where it goes as weapons. It's not just tools; it gets turned into weapons. And so one thing that's interesting is that after these people were revered. They were like, oh my gosh, these men are essentially gods. They can turn these rocks into tools that you can sharpen and that you can reuse. And it turned the chapter of civilization completely. But what they would also bring with them is you also now have to worship my supernatural helper. And every time the requirement was child sacrifice. That's how you worship the supernatural helper. And the practice of child sacrifice then became totally embedded into these cultures. And so usually it's like Molech or Baal. So we have to think about that. There's an interesting thing. There's an interesting power when you tap into the supernatural that you can get from other places. But it's the same thing. When you tap into this, if you're going to the wrong side, they will require the same thing of you. And not only that, but it could potentially trap your children in a cycle of continuing to pay back that spiritual debt. And it would require great wisdom. In fact, the name of the supernatural helper is a big part of this, is actually in the ancient Egyptian mythology, it was known that you have two names. You have your name that you use in everyday life, and then you have a true name. So the true name, if you ever learned somebody's true name, you had complete power over them, complete power and complete dominance. And so a lot of the experiments and the kinds of things that the Egyptians did were to try to discover the true names of certain gods so that the deities could continue helping them build their civilization. And so that's why the story is eventually everyone want to stop giving up their kids to this thing. And so they try to discover this. That's kind of the good ending. And it's interesting. Our God, when he's first really introducing himself to Moses, I love the part where he just tells him his name. He's like, I am. And so, and not only that, when Jesus comes to earth, you also see that whenever he's like calling a disciple, he'll often give them a new name. And I feel like this name changing is actually symbolic of him completely removing the years of spiritual debt that could have been accumulated from their family. He now can call them into something new. There's even a chapter in Revelation where it says everyone will get a new name written on a stone that only they know. So the Bible even kind of suggests that Simon turning to Peter, Saul turning to Paul. These are transformational events that totally changes the trajectory of these people's spiritual lives as well. And that's kind of the final parallel that I see with this story. So this story is as old as time, and at one point it was the demons themselves that were literally coming and making this exact offer to people, and the exact same cycle was going. But yeah, the hope here, I think, is actually what she does, which is hitting the reset button for their multi-generational family. It's like we can actually use the resources that we have and leverage every like if we can come together and you can actually get wisdom around the fire and you are able to hit the reset button, you could change the entire course of the kingdom. The entire trajectory could be changed. And so that's the hope. We now know Rumpelstiltskin's name.